Merry Meet, Annie here. This is a response to a tag video that Rita put out. I'll link you to hers below. I like this one. It looks like it'd be fun to do. It's about paranormal experiences. So I guess I have to start with a bit of a disclaimer that I don't see too many experiences as outside of normal. Which leads us to a couple of, there were 5 questions that were a part of this paranormal tag. And one of the questions was, how old were you when you experienced something for the first time? I don't remember. And the reason I don't remember is, I do remember the first time somebody told me it wasn't normal to have these kind of experiences, but I don't remember when they started because, they seemed normal. They seemed they were often very encouraging and comforting and inspiring to me, especially since I was a rather lonely and messed up little kid. And I spent a good number of my young years looking for escape from this world because, well, this world just didn't seem very friendly to me. And I was able to lose myself sometime in experiences that only later did some adult tell me just weren't normal. They were paranormal. So I still can't be convinced that there was anything not normal about them. Oh, they couldn't be explained or they couldn't be proven. And most adults didn't think I was really having the experience I said I was. But I remember that happening when I was 11 or 12 years old, but I don't remember when it started. It seems to me, always in my life, experiences of being in 2 places at one time or experiencing something that later on somebody told me just weren't normal. Does it run in my family? I tend to think it does run in my family because there was too much denial of it, too much emphatic and emotional denial of it. So I don't see where that would have come from if it weren't for they had some suspicion or experience of their own. The only person who ever talked about it openly was my grandfather. And he was very honest about the fact that none of us lived totally here and now. And in fact, it was his comments that as I matured and grew, most of the experiences I have had have not felt ghostly. And there's a couple of exceptions, but they've more felt an overlapping of time and place, where one or more times seem to happen for a bit at the same time. And I think that was his experience of it also. He was able to go back in time and have conversations intentionally with people that he wanted to talk to from his early years, or after my grandmother passed, he could spend time with her. So yeah, he had whatever this is pretty powerfully, but no one else in my family would own up to it. And he didn't think of it as spooky or ghostly or scary. He just saw it as reality. I think I inherited my perspective from him. One of the questions is, what's your scariest experience? I can think of 2. One was as an adult. Actually, I guess I can think of 3 that just leapt out really fast. Let me start with the one as a child first, because it was the scariest one, because it was the first creepy, unexplainable, scary thing that happened. My brother and I lived in a house that was a Revolutionary War house. It had been built in the early 1700s. And it was actually at the back end of a battleground from the Revolutionary War. And for those of you who are history buffs, I lived in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania at the time, and it was at the back of the land where the Battle of the Brandywine had occurred. My brother and I lived in a shared space. Our bedroom was a huge, huge room on the 2nd story of the house. It was a wonderful room. Oh, my favorite room I've ever spent time in. Huge, with a big window seat. Oh, really just wonderful. And we both had beds in there. We had twin beds that were next to each other. And my brother had, like I had had, experiences over our life that the adults were then telling us were wrong to have. And I think he closed down. He wasn't having so many of those experiences in time. I just kept tuned into him myself. We went to bed one night, and we were asleep, and we both became overwhelmed in the room that we were in with the sounds of voices talking, some quietly and smoothly, some really loud, something sounded like screams, and the moaning, and very frightening sounds for children. I think I was like 10, he was like 8. My parents came running into the room because they both were screaming. I talked with them about it once or twice. They deny any possibility of paranormal experiences. Their concept was that we were both dreaming, but they admit how confusing it was to them that we were both dreaming the exact same dream. There was an explanation for what happened. We didn't know at that time. We only learned after we left the house that the house had been an infirmary, an on-the-field hospital for the wounded from the Battle of Brandywine. I believe what we were experiencing, and as children you can imagine how terrifying it was, as a bleed over of time, one place to another. Most of the experiences I have had where there's been an experience of being in more than one world at the same time, more than one time at the same time, have been when there has been some kind of an emotion. I do think there's some kind of an energy that we put out there that creates the connection between times. Yeah, it can be a particular sharp or dramatic or traumatic emotion or a collection of emotions. I've also found it can be that delighted and happy and joyful emotions also do this. I've also found that I'm more susceptible to being two places in one time if I am at an extreme of emotion myself. To me, that has been in my life the connection for these experiences. So imagine that first one was extremely terrifying as a child and not really having an explanation for it until years later. There has also been a theme for me that has to do with old houses. I don't think in my case it's because of specifically what happened in the old houses. I think it's because I love old houses, and when I am in them I feel all the energy of all the people who have lived with them over the years, and it's a good thing. I like it. I like that feeling. It's kind of a whispers and hum and buzz around me. So I think I create the possibility for connection by that, by the way I experience these old houses. Oh, in another old house, this one also by coincidence was Revolutionary War. I was visiting a friend's house. When we were in her house, we were going up to her attic. She wanted to show us some things in the attic, and she told us as we were going up the steps, don't step on the third step. There's a problem with it. I didn't think anything of it. A very loose step, old house. Yep, I didn't want to fall or anything. Good advice, I won't step on the third step. And as we were going up, though, we were talking on the way up, so I lost track of the steps. Everybody else ahead of me stepped over the third step, and up they went. I get to the third step, step on it, but not really. It was the oddest, creepiest feeling. My foot went through it. And I don't mean that it broke and my foot went through it. I meant my foot literally just kind of dissolved down through what looked like the wood of the step. What caught me off guard, and I almost fell, I righted myself up, put my hands on the wall, and she said, I told you not to step on the third step. And we're all laughing, by the way, because we were all witches and we all had had interesting experiences in life. And I said, well, I thought it was just like rickety or broken. And she said, no, it's like a portal. That step just doesn't really exist in this time. Only in a group of witches would this be a perfectly normal thing to have happen. That was unexpected. I think I'm answering that as an example of the question, have we ever experienced anything other than a ghost? So I think that qualifies to answer that question. Another thing which falls in the scariest experience was in the same place. We went for a walk, and the house was kind of on the side of a hill, and there was this beautiful valley with a little creek that ran through the bottom, and we were all headed to the creek. I think there was some skinny dipping involved that day, if I remember. It was a beautiful summer day. But anyway, we're going through this little valley that the creek was in, and I was having a little trouble walking that day. It was when Lady Lupus first made herself known to me. So I told everybody, just go on ahead, I'll catch up with you. It's a beautiful day, I'm just going to take my time. So off they go. And I loved it because I could hear their laughter and their voices over in the woods as they got to the creek. And I was out in the bright sunlit kind of meadow at the bottom of these hills. And I was just staying there soaking it up and enjoying it and having a wonderful time just being there, until all of a sudden around me were the pounding of horses' hoofs, the clashing of metal to metal, and gunshots. I'm not talking a gunshot or two, I'm talking this field was reverberating with what was obviously a battle. I went to the ground. Really, it knocked me off my feet because it was overwhelming. Normally when these experiences happen, I get like a little bit of a dizziness first, and I know that I'm going to experience more than just this world. Nothing warned me about that. I think I was so taken up in the beauty of that meadow that I just didn't realize what was happening. So it was scary because it was rather unexpected, and I did not know the history of that plot. And indeed found out when I caught up with my friend who owned the land that there had been a battle during the Civil War in that field. So again, it was another time where there were probably heightened emotions, something that connected the two times in the two identical places. So I think I've answered scariest experience, anything other than a ghost. How old was I? Does it run in the family? The last question is, can you see, speak, or hear them? Only on a couple of times have I actually been able to have a real conversation. Both of those times felt very comfortably, again, that overlapping of time and place, where time ceases to exist. All of these experiences have taken me outside of chronological time, linear time, and have me having a whole different relationship to time. Confusing at times, but I just go with the flow of it. So I like to tell this story. I lived in the Carriage house on the property of my landlord, who was also a really good friend. Big mansion house he lived in. I lived in a little one-room down, one-room up house that was attached to the Carriage barn. And I hadn't been there for very long when the lights kept going on and off. It was an old house. Things were always happening. And it was just what I thought was another inconvenience of an old house. But I told my landlord because I was worried that there might be an electrical problem. And he said, there's no electrical problem. You're about to have an interesting experience. And he said, but I'll check just to make sure. He checked, no electrical problem. And I didn't really pursue what he said any further with him. So night after night, after it got dark, the lights would go on and off. Actually, it started being rather frustrating because I kept having to get up to turn the lights back on. So I was telling my boyfriend at the time, he would become my husband, but we were dating at the time, and I told him what was going on. Well, he was concerned because he was very scientific by nature. He's an engineer by trade, and he knew there had to be an explanation for this. So he wanted to get to the root of the problem. He was worried my house was going to burn down. We were sitting in my living room one night and the lights went out, and I said, there it goes again. He says, I'm going to go down the hallway and check this out because it's got to be an electrical problem. So I followed him down the hallway, and I'm standing in the hallway, which was very narrow. It was a little tiny house. And he started to reach out to turn the electric switch back on, and before his hand got there, the switch turned on. I didn't know a man could scream as high as this poor guy screamed. They were running out of the house. It was days, weeks before he'd come back in again. So anyway, I was getting frustrated then at this point. My boyfriend wouldn't come into the house. The lights kept going on and off. I was getting irritated. So one night when it happened, I said, that's enough of that. Turn it back on. And the lights went back on. And in the room was a young boy, maybe 10 years old or so. Clear as if he were physically standing there, but dressed in a costume, clothes not of this time. And he and I could converse with each other. It was hard to converse with him. I don't think I ever had an appreciation that whether it's English or not, what was spoken in the 1700s was not an English that's easy to understand by modern standards. So he and I got to be buds. He was an interesting young man. He was ill. He had spent most of his childhood, I don't know with what disease, but he was ill. And back in those days, if you were elderly or young with an undefinable illness, you often were confined to the house. You were considered to have vapors or some such thing, and the outside air was considered bad for you. So imagine this 10-year-old boy, normal in every way, being confined to this small house. And I think the energy, the emotion that connected his time to my time was the fact that this little guy was so bored and so frustrated. We had to have house rules. He had to learn not to come at night, to stop playing with the contraptions in my house. And it was comfortable. We shared space for 2 years in the sense of him visiting me. I never went to where he was, but he would visit me. What was fascinating is I had been away from that house for a few years when my landlord said, oh, I've got we were still friends. Come over, I've got something I've got to show you. And he had a picture that he had gotten at the local historical society. He was doing some further research on getting the house registered historically. And he found a picture of a family standing in front of the little house that I lived in. And you know how the pictures were in those times? It was, I guess it probably was a tintype, I guess. But it was a photograph of the tintype. And everybody was so, in their best clothes, all standing very, very stiff, like boards with no expressions on their face, looking very, very somber, except there was this young man that I had gotten to know so well, standing there in the middle of the picture with a big old grin on his face. Even in the picture, his exuberance was obvious compared to the people around him. There was no sad story about that young man, because after that picture we were able to research the family. Indeed, he'd gone on to live a long life and had children of his own, and there was nothing traumatic about his life experience that connected him to the house as something ghostly. But I think it was a beautiful example of bleeding over of time and what it can be like in two places at one time. Another experience I had was, I was in my 30s. I was taking a tour of, I think it was historical governor's mansion here in Delaware. And there was a really broad staircase that went up to the second floor, and at the top was this big, beautiful, unusually large for the time window at the top of the staircase. And it was a cold day, there was no heat in the house, and the sun was just pouring in that window. And we were there in a group, it was a tour group, and I just wanted to go over and stand in front of the window and stand in that warm spot of the sun that was coming in onto the floor. I just wanted to get warmed up. Started to walk over towards it, and I backed up because there was somebody there. It was an elderly lady, all dressed in black. She had lace like a hat on her head, and she was rocking in a rocking chair. And she was just, a loving and kind and welcoming presence. And I said hello, and she answered me, and we had a little bit of a conversation. But all of a sudden, I went, I know for a fact there wasn't anybody here as I come over this way. And she started to fade a little bit at that moment, because I was becoming aware of the tour group behind me going, what the heck is this woman doing? And as I became self-conscious, she actually faded away. And the tour guide laughed, and she said, "You just met Harriet." And so I guess Harriet made herself known to other people too. She had the most amazing calming presence. And often in my life, when I've needed to feel calmed down, I have envisioned that moment with her. The tour guide said that those who have toured the house both in bright sunlight and in bright moonlight, when there was a patch of lit space there where I guess her chair used to sit, have seen her and indeed often have a conversation with her. I was a little awkward throughout the rest of that tour because the people I was touring with didn't know me, and when they were very uncomfortable that this had happened. But absolutely a conversation, hearing, speaking. She appeared physical in presence. I don't think if I touched her she would have been physical, but it was a very tangible experience, but obviously not for the others on my tour. The other question here was anything other than a ghost, which assumes that we might consider these things to be ghosts, and I do not. They have been very real explorations of time overlapping time. That is not to say, though, that I don't believe in the possibility of something as ethereal as a ghost. I'm going to share that story for those who like that kind of thing in a separate video that I'm going to upload called Mr. K. I've only had a couple experiences in life that I would say I was speaking to the departed, not connected to their world or my world any longer, and indeed my experience of Mr. K was one of them. I'll share that, but not here. It didn't have to do with the 5 questions. This tag is a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to catching up on everybody who's been doing it, and I thank Rita for having done an excellent job in what she brought us. And I'm interested in everyone's take on what feels para or outside the normal. How do you look at these kind of experiences personally? Whether you've had them or not, I'm interested in your thoughts on them. I'll sign off now and do the video about Mr. K. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Merry part.